Nós, estudantes de Relações Internacionais da PUC São Paulo e integrantes do Grupo de Estudos sobre Conflitos Internacionais, em parceria com o Democracy Now!, apresentaremos as notícias da semana.
A partir de agora, vincularemos com legendas em português os principais destaques internacionais.
From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
I want him to go in at the absolute highest level, and I think to do that, you have to go through this. If it takes a little delay, it'll take a little delay.
The Senate Judiciary Committee has announced it will hold another hearing on Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh next Monday, following accusations he attempted to rape a 15-year-old girl at a party while he was in high school. Both Kavanaugh and his accuser, Professor Christine Blasey Ford, will testify. We'll speak with The Intercept's Ryan Grimm. He was the first to report Democratic Senator Dianne Feinstein had a secret letter from Dr. Blasey Ford. Then to the floods in North Carolina.
The last time this happened, it was Matthew. And now, I believe the worst is yet to come. I believe if they say the water rising is going to mess up the Cape Fear by another 20, 25 feet.
As the death toll from Hurricane Florence reaches 32, some undocumented immigrants in the region fear they'll encounter immigration enforcement if they seek help. This comes as the Trump administration has shifted $10 million from FEMA to ICE. And this week marks the 10th anniversary of the collapse of the U.S. investment bank Lehman Brothers that triggered the onset of the global financial crisis. It's also the 7th anniversary of Occupy Wall Street.
They're doing here is the assembly. The core demand, I think, right now seems to be the right to organize, to have a political conversation in a public space, to show Wall Street, so to speak, what democracy looks like.
We'll speak with Nathan Schneider, an activist with Occupy, whose new book outlines an alternative economic model based on cooperative ownership. It's called Everything for Everyone, the radical tradition that's shaping the next economy. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The Trump administration's once again slashed the number of refugees allowed to resettle in the United States. On Monday, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo announced the new cap on refugees would be an historic low of just 30,000 next year, down from the current level, 45,000. But the actual number of refugees allowed in the country is expected to be far lower. Amnesty International decried the move as a, quote, all-out attack against our country's ability to resettle refugees both now and in the future, unquote. Under President Obama, the refugee cap reached 110,000. Senate Judiciary Committee Chair Chuck Grassley has announced the committee will hold another hearing on Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh next Monday, following accusations he attempted to rape a 15-year-old girl at a party while he was in high school. Both Kavanaugh and his accuser, Professor Christine Blasey Ford, will testify. Ford told The Washington Post Kavanaugh and his friend pushed her into a bedroom during a party, and that Kavanaugh then forcibly pinned her down on a bed, tried to pull off her clothes. She says she tried to scream, but that Kavanaugh put his hand over her mouth to silence her. Kavanaugh has denied the accusation. Dr. Blasey Ford identified Kavanaugh's friend as the conservative writer Mark Judge. Judge once wrote a book about his high school days titled Wasted, Tales of a Gen X Drunk. The book describes being an alcoholic in high school and even features a cameo by someone he calls Bart O'Kavanaugh, who puked in someone's car and passed out on his way back from a party. On Monday, Republican Senator Susan Collins welcomed the additional hearing.
That does make it very difficult, and that's why it's important that there be a very thorough interview and that we see both individuals respond to the allegations. There are an awful lot of questions, inconsistencies, gaps, and that's why, to be fair to both, we need to know what happened.
We'll have more on Judge Brett Kavanaugh after headlines. In news from Syria, a Russian reconnaissance aircraft was shot down earlier today by a Syrian surface-to-air missile over the Mediterranean Sea, killing all 15 people on board. The incident occurred at the same time Israeli fighter jets were carrying out a series of bombings in the Syrian province of Latakia. Russia has accused the Israeli aircraft of pushing the Russian plane into the line of fire of Syria's air defense system. In other news from Syria, the leaders of Russia and Turkey have announced plans to create a new demilitarized zone between rebels and government forces in Syria's Idlib region. It remains unclear if Syria will go along with the plan. In news from Yemen, the U.S.-backed Saudi coalition is being accused of bombing a Yemeni radio station Sunday, killing 4 people, including 3 employees of the station. The Committee to Protect Journalists condemned the attack. Tens of thousands of North Koreans welcomed South Korean President Moon Jae-in as he arrived in Pyongyang today for his 3rd summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. The leaders are reportedly working on a statement to declare the end of the Korean War, a move opposed by the United States. The death toll from Hurricane Florence has reached 32, while the rivers in the Carolinas continue to rise from the record-breaking storm. Tens of thousands of homes have been damaged. The city of Wilmington, North Carolina, remains largely cut off from the rest of the state. On Monday, North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper warned the worst flooding may still be to come.
This is an epic storm that is still continuing, because the rivers are rising in certain parts of our state. Some areas have not seen the worst flooding yet. So this is a monumental disaster for our state that affects many of our counties, many of our people.
The rains have also swamped coal ash dumps and open-air hog manure pits, adding to the storm's devastation. Duke Energy says 2,000 cubic yards of coal ash, not 20,000 cubic tons, as we reported Monday, were released amidst Tropical Depression Florence's massive flooding in North Carolina. That's enough ash to fill roughly 180 dump trucks. The toxic ash could run off into the nearby Cape Fear River. Meanwhile, a massive typhoon in Southeast Asia has killed at least 74 people in the Philippines and forced more than 3 million people to evacuate their homes in China. Scores more are feared dead following a landslide in the small Philippines mining town of Itagan. Many died in a chapel where they had taken shelter. Meanwhile, in Nigeria, at least 100 people have died as torrential downpour and floods continue to plague the south and central regions. A national disaster has been declared in the most affected regions. Residents in the south-central port city of Lokoja were displaced due to flooding. This is Blessing Solomon.
When the water was coming, we were thinking that maybe it was just an ordinary rainwater. So we didn't even think that maybe the water would come like this, you understand? So we just like the first room, the water entered the first room. We thought it was a joke. Then when the water came to my own room, that was when we know that, yes, the water is very serious, you understand? So everybody just like pack, because even some people don't even have where to go. Just like me, I don't have where to go, but I just like, let me just cut with some of my friends in Felele.
In Gaza, an Israeli airstrike killed 2 Palestinians near the border fence with Israel. The 2 men were discovered by medics on Monday night. The Gaza Health Ministry is reporting at least 26 Palestinians were shot on Monday during protests. Meanwhile, in the occupied West Bank, a 24-year-old Palestinian man died earlier this morning while in custody after he was arrested during an Israeli military raid. Pakistan's new Prime Minister, Imran Khan, has announced plans to grant citizenship to anyone born in Pakistan. The announcement is a departure from the current policy and could drastically change the lives of Pakistan's massive refugee populations. Khan said, quote, "Those Afghans whose children are born here and have grown up in Pakistan we will also, God willing, get passports for them," unquote. According to UN numbers, close to 1.5 million Afghan refugees who were born in Pakistan could benefit from the policy. Bengali refugees in Pakistan, which include the Rohingya community, could also be granted citizenship. In Chicago, the trial of Jason Van Dyke, the police officer who killed Laquan McDonald, is underway. On the opening day of the trial, the jury was shown the now viral dash cam video showing Van Dyke shooting the unarmed African-American teenager 16 times as he walks away from them. Van Dyke faces 2 counts of first-degree murder. He's the first police officer in Chicago to stand trial for killing someone on duty in 50 years. Last year, 3 Chicago police officers were indicted on felony charges for conspiring to cover up the facts of McDonald's shooting. Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel has also been sharply criticized for his response to the killing, namely in the delayed release of the dash cam evidence. The Miami Herald reports a former police chief in Biscayne Park, Florida, pleaded guilty to a conspiracy charge of depriving 3 innocent African-American men of their civil rights by framing them. Raimundo Atesiano admitted to directing police officers to frame innocent men in cases of unsolved burglaries and break-ins to benefit his department's crimes record. Atesiano had previously boasted about the department's success rate. He reached a plea deal with the U.S. Attorney's Office and will face sentencing in November. President Trump has taken the unusual step of ordering the intelligence community to declassify a trove of documents and text messages related to the ongoing investigation into Russia's alleged meddling in the 2016 election. The documents include the FISA warrant application targeting Trump campaign foreign policy advisor Carter Page, as well as the text messages related to the Russian probe of a number of former high-ranking FBI and Justice Department officials, including former FBI Director James Comey, as well as Andrew McCabe, Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, and Bruce Orr. Congressmember Adam Schiff, the top-ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, criticized Trump, calling his move a clear abuse of power. And in media news, Salesforce CEO Mark Benioff and his wife Lynn have purchased Time magazine from Meredith Corporation for $190 million. Time magazine is the latest publication to be purchased by a billionaire. Earlier this year, biotech billionaire Patrick Soon-Shiong bought the Los Angeles Times and the San Diego Union Tribune. 2 years ago, conservative billionaire Sheldon Adelson bought the Las Vegas Review-Journal, and in 2013, Jeff Bezos acquired the Washington Post. The Texas State Board of Education has voted in favor of removing certain content from the required social studies curriculum in order to, quote, streamline the curriculum. Historical figures that may be dropped include the deaf-blind civil rights socialist pioneer Helen Keller and Hillary Clinton, the first female presidential nominee for a major party, who both scored low on the board's grading system. The Republican majority board's decision will undergo a final vote in November after a period of public response. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
To any woman who hears this story, this is not an unusual or uncommon story that when they were younger, some young boy, some young man decided that they had the right to throw them down and to try to take their clothes off. And I think that, I hope that in this year of Me Too, that we've come far enough now to take this very, very seriously.
Today, Oscar-winning filmmaker Michael Moore on Dr. Christine Blasey Ford's allegations that Supreme Court Justice nominee Brett Kavanaugh attempted to rape her as a teenager. She wants the FBI to investigate her claims before she testifies to the Senate. Moore's new film, Fahrenheit 11/9, about President Trump and much more, is out this week. We'll also discuss Kavanaugh's nomination, now up in the air, with Reverend Dr. William Barber of the Poor People's Campaign.
We know that when the courts have been wrong in this country, and there have been many times, that it has turned us backwards rather than forward. In the light of this, there must be a moral fight to keep Kavanaugh off the Supreme Court.
Reverend Barber will join us from North Carolina, where President Trump heads today to survey massive flood damage from Hurricane Florence. Barber says in the hurricane wind and waves, the poor suffer most. Then the Trump administration slashes the refugee admissions cap to a historic low of 30,000 refugees per year.
The improved refugee policy of this administration serves the national interest of the United States and expands our ability to help those in need all around the world. We will continue to assist the world's most vulnerable while never losing sight of our first duty, serving the American people.
Amnesty International says the new refugee cap means more people fleeing violence, religious persecution, and armed conflict could die. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The leaders of North and South Korea have wrapped up their third summit this year with a vow to denuclearize the Korean peninsula. Earlier today, South Korean President Moon Jae-in and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un held a joint news conference in Pyongyang. Kim vowed to move towards denuclearization if the United States takes steps of its own.
We adopted a military pact to end a history of brutal and tragic confrontation and hostility, and agreed to make efforts to turn the Korean peninsula into a land of peace without nuclear weapons and nuclear threats.
South Korean President Moon Jae-in praised the North Korean offer. He said the era of no war has started.
South and North Korea agreed on a denuclearization plan for the first time. It is a very meaningful outcome. The North has decided to permanently abolish the Tongchanri engine test site and missile launchers with the attendance of experts from relevant countries.
The two leaders also agreed to pursue a bid to co-host the 2032 Olympic Games, and Moon said he expects Kim Jong-un to soon become the first North Korean leader to ever visit Seoul. The woman who's accused Supreme Court Justice nominee Brett Kavanaugh of attempting to rape her as a teenager has asked for the FBI to investigate her claims before she testifies to the Senate. Senate Judiciary Committee Chair Chuck Grassley had invited the woman, Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, and Kavanaugh to both testify Monday. In a letter to Grassley, Blasey Ford's attorneys wrote, quote, "While Dr. Ford's life was being turned upside down, you and your staff scheduled a public hearing for her to testify at the same table as Judge Kavanaugh in front of 24 U.S. senators on national television to relive this traumatic and harrowing incident." The letter went on to reveal Christine Blasey Ford has received multiple death threats in the past few days and has been forced to move her family out of her home. On Tuesday night, one of her attorneys, Lisa Banks, appeared on CNN.
Any talk of a hearing on Monday, frankly, is premature because she just came forward with these allegations 48 hours ago. And since that time, she has been dealing with hate mail, harassment, death threats. So she's been spending her time trying to figure out how to put her life back together, how to protect herself and her family. And there hasn't been an investigation, and these are serious allegations.
On Tuesday night, Senator Grassley said there's no reason for any further delay of the hearing, even if Dr. Christine Blasey Ford does not testify. Meanwhile, President Trump dismissed the need for an FBI probe into her allegations.
To that end, what would be the problem with the FBI reopening their background investigation into Judge Kavanaugh? Would you support such a thing?
It wouldn't bother me other than the FBI, John, said that they really don't do that. That's not what they do.
Democratic Senator Dianne Feinstein of California responded on Twitter by writing, quote, "Fact check. The FBI can investigate Dr. Blasey Ford's allegations as part of its background investigation. That's their job. To say otherwise is false. It investigated Anita Hill's allegations of sexual harassment against Clarence Thomas. It should investigate this, too," Feinstein tweeted. President Trump also defended Brett Kavanaugh, describing him as a great gentleman.
I feel so badly for him that he's going through this, to be honest with you. I feel so badly for him. This is not a man that deserves this. And we will see what happens. But I just think he is at a level that we rarely see, not only in government, anywhere in life. And honestly, I feel terribly for him, for his wife, who is an incredible, lovely woman, and for his beautiful young daughters. I feel terribly for them.
President Trump did not refer to Kavanaugh's accuser by name, just calling her the woman. The death toll from Hurricane Florence has risen to 35, while the flooding is worsening in some parts of North Carolina. President Trump is heading to North Carolina today, where some 10,000 people are still living in shelters and nearly 350,000 are without power. Meanwhile, in South Carolina, 2 women detainees died Tuesday when they were being transported in a sheriff's van, which was overcome by floodwaters. The women were both mental health patients being detained for medical transport. 2 sheriff's deputies in the vehicle were able to be rescued from the rising waters. We'll have more on Hurricane Florence later in the program with the Reverend Dr. Barber. President Trump has confirmed the United States is considering building a permanent U.S. military base in Poland.
We're looking at it very seriously. I know Poland likes the idea very much, and it's something that we are considering, yes.
Trump made the comment during a White House meeting with the Polish President Duda, suggested naming the base Fort Trump. Poland has been pushing for an increased U.S. presence as a counter to what it has described as Russian aggression in the region. In other military news, Stars and Stripes is reporting the U.S.-led international coalition in Afghanistan is building new, hardened, permanent structures in Kabul. In the latest sign, the 17-year war won't be ending anytime soon. NATO is seeking bids to build a massive concrete command and control center at its compound. In news from Yemen, U.S.-backed Saudi forces have launched a new series of attacks on the port city of Hodeidah, sparking fears of a humanitarian crisis. The charity Save the Children has warned disruption to supplies coming through Hodeidah could, quote, cause starvation on an unprecedented scale. The group warns 5 million children are at risk of famine. Meanwhile, CNN's reporting new evidence confirms U.S.-made bombs have been used in a series of attacks killing Yemeni civilians since the U.S.-backed Saudi assault began in 2015. The CNN probe was based on shrapnel found at the scene of multiple bombings. Several of the bombs were manufactured by Raytheon. In Gaza, Israeli forces killed 2 Palestinians Tuesday and wounded 46, firing shots at a crowd of thousands protesting near the Erez checkpoint border fence with Israel. The protest was in part calling out the recent halt in funding by the U.S. to the UN agency UNRWA. Meanwhile, Israeli forces shot and killed a Palestinian man in the occupied East Jerusalem. A new UN report is slamming Burma's leadership for the mass atrocities committed against the Rohingya minority. The report details violence in the western state of Rakhine and finds that the Burmese military committed, quote, the gravest crimes under international law when Rohingya villages were cleared a year ago. The report builds on an earlier UN report from August, which called for top Burmese military leaders to be prosecuted for crimes against humanity and genocide. A top UN human rights investigator also called out Burma's civilian leader, Nobel Peace Prize laureate Aung San Suu Kyi, for being a, quote, fig leaf for military atrocities. This is Marzuki Darusman, chair of the UN Independent International Fact-Finding Mission on Myanmar.
Repressive laws are being used to silence those that seek to scrutinize. We have verified instances of reprisals against individuals for sharing information with the United Nations. Peaceful protests are blocked, sometimes violently, as occurred in the village of Mrauk-U. While voices critical of the government are muted by threats and arrest, hate speech is thriving, particularly against the Rohingya. Patience will not help Myanmar's democratization. It will only help those that seek to derail it, as it has for over 70 years.
China hit back at President Trump's recently announced tariffs on the country by confirming its planned tariffs on $60 billion worth of U.S. products. The tariff rates were lowered from previous proposals and continues the ongoing trade war between the two nations. In response, President Trump warned he may impose additional tariffs on all remaining Chinese goods. A member of the Russian activist group Pussy Riot remains hospitalized in Berlin after losing the ability to speak or walk. On Tuesday, German doctors said the activist, Piotr Verzilov, was likely poisoned. He was hospitalized last week after falling gravely ill. In July, he was arrested and jailed after rushing the field during a World Cup match to protest Russian police brutality and human rights abuses. He reportedly started having severe symptoms after attending a court hearing in Moscow. In 2012, Piotr appeared on Democracy Now! To talk about Russia's jailing of his former wife, Nadia Tolokonnikova, also of Pussy Riot.
A week later, I went to see Nadia, and around 20 or 25 FSB officers just were jumping out of nowhere and apprehended us. We were put to the ground, guns stuck to our heads, and then we were taken to interrogation. And the same thing happened with other two girls.
That's Piotr Verzilov. He remains hospitalized in Berlin. That interview from 2012. You can go to the whole interview at democracynow.org. In voting rights news, Mother Jones reports Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross lied under oath in testimony about the controversial citizenship question in the 2020 census. Ross claimed the Justice Department requested the addition of the question in order to better enforce the Voting Rights Act. But new emails confirm he was the one who approached the Justice Department about including the controversial question after consulting with senior White House officials. Kansas Secretary of State Chris Kobach, then head of the widely discredited and now defunct Election Integrity Commission, was one of the officials who lobbied Ross to add the question, quote, at the direction of Steve Bannon, unquote. Multiple lawsuits are challenging the inclusion of the citizenship question in the census. The Roman Catholic Diocese of Brooklyn, New York, has agreed to pay out $27.5 million to 4 men who were sexually abused by a religious teacher between 2003 and 2009. It's one of the largest settlements ever awarded to individual abuse victims within the Catholic Church. And McDonald's workers around the country went on strike against the fast food giant Tuesday to protest sexual harassment. At rallies in various cities, workers decried sexual abuse and harassment in the workplace and said the company has not addressed their complaints in many cases. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
Nosso programa fica por aqui. Você pode acompanhar a gente pela página no Facebook ou pelo blog Terra em Transe.
Nos vemos na próxima semana. Até lá!